Today we'll learn about how to build a full-stack Chatgpt clone with message history, which is connected to a MongoDB hosted by Railway. Very easy. Using htmx, so we'll need little or no JavaScript. Tailwind CSS, so we won't have a long and complicated CSS file. We'll also take a look at how we can have really cool loaders. You can start a new chat, which clears the screen. You can go back to any older chats and continue your conversations. When you send a message, it features this cool loader from SVG loaders until your message is loaded, and then it disappears when you have your message. We are going to have a very simple HTML file along with a very simple Python file with 6 API endpoints in our server, along with a function to make a call to GPT, and we're going to be connecting to MongoDB client. Requirements are pretty lightweight too. PyMongo to connect to MongoDB, and Markdown to send assistance responses as Markdown back to the HTML. In our HTML, we are linking to Tailwind CSS CDN, to htmx's CDN, and also to AutoSize, which allows us to have an expanding text input box with just a single line of JavaScript. In our body HTML tag, we have a main container div, and in it, we have a sidebar and a chat box. This is the sidebar over here, and this is the chat box. Inside the sidebar, which is a flex box, we have a new chat button and a chat history div. This is the button right here, and this is the chat history, which is auto-populated by htmx calls to the server from MongoDB. Tailwind CSS is very easy. It reduces our need for CSS, but it uses CSS, so flex means flexbox. Each screen is equal to 100 VH in CSS, and we are setting a background color of gray with an intensity of 800. Here in our sidebar, we are doing flex, column formation, column up, over, column direction for our flex. We are centering the items, giving it a gray background, having the width 1/5 of the viewport width. We are giving it a padding in x-axis of 2, and on the y-axis of 2, overflow y auto hidden, so we can have a scroll bar. And our chat box area is consisting of 2 divs too, the main messages area and then the input area. Here is our chat box. If we open it, we see that we have a div with messages and a form with a text area and a button, as you see here. Text area and the button, and this is the messages there. We are using the style.css file only to define a nice looking pretty scroll bar, to assign it to the scroll bar class, so that when we have a long conversation, we have this pretty looking scroll bar on the side. htmx works a bit like magic. Here we have our form and the button, which represents this text input area, and this button right here. When this form is triggered with this button, with hx post, we are making a call to this endpoint, new_chat. As you see, this is one of our endpoints on our server, and we are targeting the messages class, which is right here, currently empty. We are using the hx indicator with this SVG animation right here. This way, it automatically starts as hidden, and when this call is being made, while we wait for the response, it becomes visible. And then when we receive our response, then it disappears, such as you see right here. Then when we receive the response, we see hx swap before the end. What that means is whatever we receive from the new chat endpoint actually finds this div and finds the end of it, the ending tag, and places it before the end. There are multiple ways to position your response within the HTML, such as inner HTML, outer HTML, and a few more. You can read about it at htmx's documentation. And we are able to call JavaScript functions as well. After loaded, we call the script clear input to clear the text area's value. So when we send a message, the text area is cleared. The code files for this will be available at my Patreon. The source code and the link will be in the description. Also, if you enjoy my videos and you like to build GPT-powered web apps, then check out my website, echohive.live, with 140 plus free coding videos. Link will be in the description. I have opened up all the functions and our endpoints, API endpoints, and placed some breakpoints. We're going to run this in debug mode and see step by step how this entire thing works. I will have the UI on the side, and the first thing is what happens on page load. Before we run the code in debug mode and see line by line what is happening, I want to talk about how to connect the Mongo client and how easy it is to launch a MongoDB database with Railway. In your Railway dashboard, simply create a new project. Here I have this one. I already have the MongoDB, but how I created it is right-click, database, and by selecting MongoDB, and then an instance is automatically created, and your connection credentials are right here. You just copy this and paste it using the Mongo client from PyMongo, and that's it. And then we create a database called htmx chat and a collection called chat history. Now we have a database. Let's continue with what happens with the first load of the page. When we first load the page, we call the load history on page load API endpoint. We are able to call that because on the body tag, we have hx trigger load, hx get pointing to that API endpoint. hx target is chat history, which is the sidebar right here, where we're going to add the buttons. And we say hx swap after begin, which is wherever this div is beginning, which is right here, we are going to be inserting those buttons. We are initiating a current chat ID and current chat message to none and an empty list. MongoDB automatically creates an object ID for each entry, for each document. We are going to be using that as our identifier. As you see, we haven't loaded our history buttons yet, but we are going to. We are using current chat ID and current chat message as global variables. When we load the page, we set the current chat ID and current chat message back to empty. And then we get essentially all the documents from our collection. It's that easy with MongoDB. Remember, we had set the collection here to DB chat history, and we are using that right here with find one to get the chat. And so we are actually going to just check if there is a chat history. If it's not none, then we are going to continue. We're going to create a buttons list, and we are going to loop over collection.find. These are all MongoDB commands. It's very easy. I really love MongoDB. I hope you'll take a look at it in comparison to SQL databases. So we are going to loop over all our histories and grab the chat ID from the ID key from MongoDB. And we are going to grab the summary because we are getting the conversation summarized on top of the buttons, just like it happens with Chatgpt UI. Then we are creating a button HTML here with an F string. Essentially, we're just creating a button element with some Tailwind styling and also with htmx API calls. Here we are, this one. When this is created over here, is going to be calling the load chat. Trigger is when it's clicked, and it's going to target messages, and it's going to swap the inner HTML. And we are retrieving the data chat ID. We are assigning a chat ID to this so that later we know which button is responsible with which chat history. After that, we insert it to the buttons list, and then we can now move on. And after that, we are going to just return the HTML response. Now we are at this point, and if I click, see all our buttons have appeared, and you can actually hover over them and see their full descriptions. These descriptions are generated by GPT as well. The next step is what happens when we send a message. I'm just going to send a simple message, hi. As soon as we send the message, we actually make a call to the new chat endpoint, because as you remember, our form was making an htmx call to the new chat endpoint. We are going to receive the data from this request, and our message is hi, and our role is going to be user, and we are checking if we are in a current chat we do have a current chat ID, then we will be appending it to that. If not, we are going to be creating a new chat history. Because we don't have any current chat ID, then we will move on and print console terminal, no current chat history. We append the user's message to a new chat, and then we are inserting it into our MongoDB collection. And then our current chat ID is now the ID of this new chat. Then we are appending to the current chat messages the user's message, and simply we return the response to be displayed to the user, just like this. But something cool happens. As soon as we display this response, because we are returning this div HTML element, and it has an htmx trigger load, which calls the getGPT response endpoint. As soon as this message is loaded, then we make another API call to getGPT response. As you see, we have already entered getGPT response, and now we are going to use the current chat messages to get a response. Assistant says, hello, how can I assist you? We append that to current chat messages. We update our MongoDB collection, and we actually use, at this juncture, the markdown it to actually convert our response to markdown, just in case if it contains any code or tables. After that, we check to see if this current chat ID is in our chat IDs, which we have retrieved in the beginning of the script, to make sure that to check if we have a new chat or if we are actually working with chat history. Because this is a new chat, we are simply creating a new element with that assistant message. But again, this one is going to have another hx trigger load, and this one is actually going to call load history button with the target of .chat history, which is this div right here. And as soon as we return this HTML response right here, we are now entering another API call, which is the load history button. We are getting the current messages, and we are appending to the current messages, summarize this conversation in a maximum of 3-word sentence, generally describing what the conversation is about. And then we are making a call to GPT. We have received the summary. This one is called Greetings and Assistance, and we are updating the collection with the summary. And we are appending to the chat IDs this current chat ID, meaning now we have a history of this conversation. And now we are going to create a new button element and return it to be displayed right here along with other buttons which are responsible for message histories. And this one also has an htmx call, which will actually call the load chat button, which will, when clicked, will load the entire message history right here so the user can continue old messages. So now if we go over this, as you see, now we have greeting and assistance appeared right here. I also want to show you that in our MongoDB, our database is updated. The last element is hi and greetings and assistance as the summary. So next up is what happens when we click one of these buttons. Code files for this, along with 100 plus GPT app building projects, including full stack apps, will be available at my Patreon. The link will be in the description. Thank you for your support. And you can check my website at echohive.live to search and watch all my videos and find all the code download links. Before we continue on how these buttons operate, I just want to talk about the SVG loaders. If you go to samherbert.net SVG loaders, then you can actually go to the GitHub and simply just download the SVGs from SVG loaders. Okay, once you have these in your working directory, here we are having our static files in the static directory. I just have the SVG right here. Then you can actually use them right away. They are already animated. In our case, we have this as an image, the puff.svg, which is this one right here, with an ID of indicator and a class of htmx indicator. And we are using it in our form as with the hx indicator. This way, it starts hidden, and when this API call is taking place, it becomes visible. This way you can have loading animations. Now let's continue and see what happens when we're trying to load message history. Let's just click on this one. As soon as we click on it, then we call the load chat API, because when we were returning, remember when we were returning the button, we did assign it htmx call, htmx get load chat. So this got triggered with a click, right? So now when I clicked on this button, we called immediately to this load underscore chat API endpoint. And because we have assigned a data chat ID to these buttons, we can actually, and by using htmx config request, okay, we are actually able to send this.get attribute data.chat ID along with the request that is being made. So we can actually extract it right here. So now if we go, we have extracted the chat ID for this button. And then we are going to use collection.find1. We are going to find that ID from our MongoDB. I do want to mention that when you're searching for ID, you do have to use an object. Here I am using based on that object ID. But when we are actually storing the chat ID for our purposes, such as an attribute, we are using the stringified version of it. If you pay attention to the code from before, as you see, we are getting the ID of the MongoDB's document, but we are stringifying it with str. Anyway, we are finding the chat. There we go. We have retrieved the chat from MongoDB, htmx benefits explained. Current chat ID is going to be chat ID, and we make sure that we have a chat. If we do, then we are going to format the chat with a for loop, inline for loop. We are going to create this divs because we are going to have multiple divs, right? Some for user and some for the assistant. And we are going to create a list and join it into a string, which we are going to return as an HTML response. But before we do that, we actually create a div with some Tailwind classes for styling. And this will be the user message. We check. We create this div if the message role is user. Otherwise, we create this next div if the message is assistant for message in chat messages. If you remember, we have retrieved the chat from MongoDB, and messages key is the entire messages. The messages key contains all the messages. If I zoom in, as you see, right here. But pay attention that we don't do this for the user message, but for the assistant message, we are using md.render so that we can render assistant's response, GPT's response, if it's code or a table or something, in Markdown. Then we create these formatted chat, which includes a lot of divs, okay? And then we simply return this response back to the front end. And as you see, all our text history has been loaded. So this is how we can load the chat history directly from MongoDB. Now let's take a look at what happens when we click the new chat button. I do recommend that you go through and read the htmx's documentation. It's quite a lot of fun. I actually did that last night. I'll put these links in the description to htmx, Tailwind, and these SVG loaders. Anyway, now let's explore what happens when we click on the new chat button. Let's click it. If you remember, our new chat button has some HTML Tailwind styling. It also has a transition. You can define transitions and hover states and active states with Tailwind. As you see, if you hover over new chat, it actually transitions over 300 milliseconds with ease and out. But the important part is that here we have another htmx call with hx-cat calls the clear chat and API endpoint, targets the messages div, and swaps the entire div itself with what we are going to return. And we are, as a matter of fact, in the clear chat, because we are going to clear this chat, we are going to clear the current chat history and the current chat messages. And then simply we're going to return an HTML response of our original empty div. And when we do that, we have cleared our chat. And because we have cleared the current chat ID and current chat messages, now the user can engage in a fresh new chat. The requirements for this is OpenAI, FastAPI, Unicorn, Markdown.py for converting our GPT responses to Markdown, and then assigning it to the HTML response, PyMongo to connect to the MongoDB. Now let's see how we can actually deploy this. When you are in your Railway dashboard, make sure that you have connected to your GitHub repository in your profile, which I have. I'm going to click on New Project. And from New Project, I'm going to type in FastAPI because we are using FastAPI as a backend. I'm going to select htmx-chat as the name. I'm going to click on Private Repository and click on Deploy. And in just a few seconds, this repository will be created in my GitHub. And if I refresh this, now I see that htmx-chat has been created. Now all I have to do is, this is just a template in a boilerplate. It includes a main.py file, but we are going to override it. I'm going to click on Add File and Upload Files. And from my working directory, I'm going to select the static files, which contain the index.html, path.svg, and style.css. And the main.py file and the requirements.txt file, and simply drag it, let them upload, and after that, I'm going to commit these changes. Once these changes are committed, then Railway is going to detect the change pretty quickly too, and we'll start the building process. You can view the process by clicking on View Logs, and this is your build logs. And once this is built, then you'll be able to see your deploy logs, which will print everything that would normally print in your terminal. This process may take a few minutes. I'll be right back when this is done. Now I want to mention that we are using Unicorn to start our server. There are alternatives, and this is our command to start our server. Main is the name of our file. App is what we have defined as the FastAPI object. We assign a port, a host, and a port. Reload true in the case of local testing, so that anytime you change the main.py file's contents, the website will reload. So we need to run this command, right? Here in this case, we're running it from the file, or you'll have to actually run it from your terminal to get the server started. But here in my deployment, I'm seeing that we are actually crashing. And the reason is because I'll have to restart it to see the logs. But the reason was because we are using, in the repo that we created in the railway.json file, we are using the start command. Hypercorn is the start command. We don't want to use Hypercorn, we want to use Unicorn. So in the railway.json file, which is the setup file, I'm going to change it to Unicorn main app host, and then the port to $port in capitals so that Railway can choose any port. And I'm going to commit these changes. Hopefully these changes should work. Railway detected it immediately and started rerunning the deploy. Now, if you click on your deployment and you go to settings, and if you scroll down, you will actually come across the build command. This is the start command right here. We have changed it. We have changed the file, but you could have actually overridden the build command right here as well. Hopefully this should work. We'll give it a minute. This time around, our application deployed perfectly, Unicorn running, as we see, and we have a web URL for this. If you click on this, we have loaded it along with our previous message history because our MongoDB is already running as well in a different project. Doesn't matter, we can connect to it. We could have created a new MongoDB instance here as well. Okay, all you had to do was click on New Database and click on MongoDB, and we are starting a MongoDB instance. Here we go. We just got that created. Okay, now we can click on this, and this is online now, and we can go to connect, and we can actually copy this key right here, and then we can come to our GitHub repository because this is the one that is online right now, and go into main.py file, edit it, and change this string, okay, to the new one, like this. Actually, you have to get rid of the Mongosh because that is how you would interact with it through the command line interface. this should work. We have replaced our old database. I'm going to commit the changes. And when the changes are committed, our Railway detected it and it is redeploying. Seems like our new deployment worked. Let's get rid of the old one and open the new one. And as you see, we have a fresh new DB because we don't have any chat history. Okay, but if we start a chat real quick. Now earlier I was getting an error because apparently something I forgot, that we do need Python multipart. Okay, I have added this to my requirements. I apologize for forgetting about this, but this is a common occurrence where when you're trying to deploy your stuff that you're going to forget some of your dependencies. Anyway, after adding Python multipart, I went ahead and uploaded again my requirements.txt file to the repository. As you see now, it is updated with Python multipart. Once I did that, then we redeployed my app, and this time it was working. But then I was getting another error of OpenAI API key error. The reason for that is because we are defining our OpenAI API key from our environment variables. Because of this, I need to give Railway my API key as a variable. I'm going to click on my FastAPI app. I'm going to go to variables. Under variables, click on new variable. Create a new variable name called OpenAI API key. Paste your API key here and then click add. I have added my OpenAI API key as a variable and redeploy schedule. This will redeploy quickly. So now when we try to call our API key from the environment variables, we shouldn't get an error. Our app is rebuilding. Deployment is successful. Let's take a look at the logs. So we have no error so far. Here we have no message history because we are starting from a fresh new MongoDB. I'm just going to say hi and messages received and message history have been created. If I say new chat and click on this, I can see that my history is there. I can go to my MongoDB and go to chat history. As you see, htmx chat database was created. Chat history collection is created. And here is the messages along with the summary. Now I can actually go back to the old DB and actually stop this from running or delete it. And even if I were to delete this, then our app will still operate because we created a new MongoDB. I hope you found this useful. Like I said, the code files will be available at my Patreon. You can download it and deploy it yourselves, maybe improve it. I'll maybe try to make a live stream about this too. I'm really enjoying building these. I know maybe some of you are saying, oh my God, another Chatgpt clone, but I think the usage of htmx and along with Tailwind really makes this applications very simple. It's a very short and quick learning curve. I hope you'll take a look at these and start building your own full stack web apps. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.